So learning outcome 3 is be able to evaluate your own use of resources in the delivery of inclusive teaching and learning. So there's 2 points here. 3.1 is review the effectiveness of own practice in using resources to meet the individual needs of learners, taking account of the views of learners and others also. And then 3.2 is identify areas for improvement in own use of resources to meet the individual needs of learners. So it's over here and there. So we're just going to talk about evaluating the use of resources as well. So you know what resources are. This is the different items that you use on a daily basis. So when you're using resources in teaching and learning, these items are actually there to assist you with your lessons, with your presentation, with you actually physically passing out your educational content. So whatever your objectives are, these resources are there to aid you in actually helping to pass on the information. So it might be something as simple as using a picture. So if you're talking about maps, actually showing a map. Or if you're talking about measurements, bringing out a ruler and actually modeling how to use those things. So all of these different items actually help you to, pass on your knowledge and give you different abilities and values. So in a way, if you were trying to explain how to measure something without anything to, like a device that measures, like a ruler or a piece of string or something, you wouldn't really be able to do it, would you? It's just explaining and it's not easy to pass on. But because you have that visual, it happens a lot easier. So when we're doing this, we've got I've got a list of common goals and examples on here. So to use resources, it helps you with student motivation. It helps you to develop creativity. It also helps to pass on your prior knowledge. So if a student has done something to do with the number lines previously, then you show them one, they're like, oh yeah, I did that to do adding. Now we're doing that to do subtractions instead. It encourages them to have the understanding. It decodes it for them. It organizes it. So on the educational content, physically what you're teaching them, it helps them to have logical thinking and reasoning and communicate and interact. So a lot of things can take place just simply by using resources. Again, it also helps you to contribute to the development of different skills. So it gives you, it helps them to understand what knowledge they have, what skills they have, and what attitudes they've got towards learning. So whether or not we're actually using these resources for different purposes or not, they've got lots of different duties, and it really depends on if you're using them correctly or not. Now, if you're talking about different colors and how to say if you got do you know what is popular in early years now? Is coloring by you do adding, say 1 or 2. Answer 3 is red. If you got answer as a 4, it's green. If you got an answer as a 5, it's pink. We used to do those around Christmas time for Christmas trees and decorations and pictures as an activity. Yeah. If you're trying to model that and you're physically saying, oh, right, I don't have a pink pen here, but I've got a yellow one. So just imagine this yellow pen is pink, and then you color that in. And then they say, oh, I've not got a green, but I've got a black, and then you color that in. You're not really modeling in the correct way, are you? So it's very important that you use the right type of things. So going on to 3.1. So reviewing the effectiveness of own practice in using resources to meet the individual needs of learners, taking account of the views of learners and others. Ooh, big mouthful. So on here, when we're reviewing, what does it mean by reviewing? So just to cut it down, reviewing is just a process that helps you to look at your own personal experience for you to learn and develop from. It's also another word for processing or debriefing or reflection, as you're quite aware of. So you're just looking back on your own practices, on your own learning, your development, what you're doing on a daily basis. You might have had an intervention group, or you might have taken the class for an afternoon, And then later on, you might go back and you might think about, oh, okay, that child there was acting up. So why was it? Did I not intervene in enough time? Was I being boring? Were they all falling asleep? Were they not finding it interesting? Was I talking for too long? So you're back and you're thinking, oh, what can I change this with? So we go on to resources that can help aid learning. So when you're going to use resources, like we said earlier, it's really important that you actually choose the right type of resources for what you need to do. They need to be realistic and relevant. They need to be something that, you know, if you're setting a homework for an English activity, that you've got to say, okay, you can't say you choose this particular book if they don't have access to the book, or if you're not going to give them that book. You've got to say, okay, choose a book, any book, and write me a book review on it. You can't say, go and choose the Goldilocks and Three Bears. What if they don't physically have that at home and you're not providing it? So you've got to make sure that they're not going to be put off and it's inclusive, that anybody and everybody has access to these resources. And if they don't, you need to provide it for them. So again, learning resources, they're really relevant in education. So learning resources are things from like physically having things in your hand and showing them particular items, or, you know, having a feely bag or anything like that, to things like that you might use on your presentations, like a video on YouTube. You might physically have a flip chart, you know, those pieces of A4 those large pieces of paper on a big flippy board, where you can actually write things down and flip over and use another piece.
Yes.
Things like whiteboards that the kids have their personal whiteboards and a marker with them, but then you've also got your own whiteboard that you can use and write on interactively also. You can use projectors, PowerPoints, text, so physically typing out the text as well, smart devices, and lots of different softwares. Like you mentioned previously that you use the OB and BOB software.
Yeah.
So, you know, that so that they can actually be able to learn what's a real word, which is an alien word, and it helps them with their year 1 phonics test, isn't it? So overall, the purpose of this is to just give the children, the students, the opportunity to explore new ideas, look at different types of knowledge, be able to collaborate with each other, to talk to each other, to solve different problems, and also, you know, to develop any different knowledge and skills. So if you excuse me 1 second, I've got a full house today. I've got my nieces and nephews over, and we're just getting a bit of noise. I'm just going to ask them to quieten down.
No problem.
Hi, Geeta. I'm so sorry about that.
It's all right.
So, my sister-in-law has started doing full-time work as well, so the kids come over for a little bit. So, you know, when they all get together, they go crazy. I think it's just been one of those days that we're going to be full of interruptions.
No worries.
So let's go on to the next slide. So again, with coming back onto the resources that we use on a daily basis, they have to be reliable and they have to actually support your awarding body. So within yourself and any primary and high school settings, it has to be the national curriculum. For myself, when I'm using resources, it has to be in accordance to, for you, for NCFE for this course, or OTHM or ATHE or Pearson. So different, whoever that is, that awarding body, you have to work off those. If they say you need to use particular textbooks, then I'm going to be working off them. If they say use particular items, then I have to be working off those.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've got a little quote on here. So according to Clathon and JLL, what they say is that curriculum resources should also provide for individual differences. So they should closely coordinate and be selectively integrate your subject matter, and they need to focus on the results or the standards and the targets for student learning. So in other words, they have to be tweaked and differentiated in accordance to what your students' understanding is, but also follow what you're actually teaching as well, along with making sure that you're really focusing on what your targets are and what your standards are. So really, sometimes you think, oh, I'm going to use a PowerPoint now, or I'm going to show the students a video, and it feels like it's one of those things that you don't really have to think about much. But if you're going into specialized resources where you're going to be creating things, then you have to really closely monitor what you're using it for and why are you going to do it. So that'll come into handy, especially when you're in a lesson and you're differentiating work. It's as simple as having 3 types of worksheets rather than one for everyone. So you're still teaching the curriculum, but you're doing it in a way. Yeah. So we've got a range of different learning resources that will actually cater to different abilities on here. So for a learner who has English as an additional language, I mean, this differs quite a lot, and it's been a little while since I've been in primary school, but from what things that I used to use when I was in primary were things like picture exchange system. We'd use intervention programs like Welcome or Getting Ready to Read or First Class at Number 1, and there'll be probably a few different ones that you're familiar with. So for different learning abilities, we do simply differentiated and ability-based worksheets. For somebody who may not be achieving the levels that they should be coming up to, you might break up tasks so that they're easier to understand. You might have 2 questions, then another sheet with another 2 questions, and so on. You could have group support sessions so that any learners who are on the same ability can work together. But also, what I always found that I liked was in certain topics, like, say, science, or in languages, when we were teaching something that had to do a lot of writing on it, we'd set up a high ability and a low ability child together so that they could support each other and work off that way. But there could be one negative point in that is sometimes you notice that the higher ability child might start taking over and won't be that patient with the lower ability child. So there can be plus and negatives on that. And again, you could use your interactive whiteboard as a learning tool. It helps to be there for visual learners who actually have to physically see something to do it. It helps for auditory learners who actually, you can listen to, they'll be listening to you speak about it, they'll be looking at videos. And then for kinesthetic learners who actually physically have to see something happening and then physically do it themselves. So if you're modeling how to color in a particular picture or make a drawing of yourself, a portrait, they'll see you do it and they'll do it themselves. Is there anything that you use in your school to, cater for different abilities?
Not really sure much about it because I'm mostly within the classroom. So if anybody has got special need, they've been taken out. But but if only on a severe level. But yes, for EAL, I can say like there are intervention groups going on. EAL team comes and take them on regular basis, like 2 or 3 times in a week, where they've been pre-teach the session what we are supposed to do in class. So what we are supposed to do this week, they have already started the last week. So it gives them quite confidence to join within the class when we are doing something. So they are not left out. So they have already been done that input on their own level.
That's quite good, you know, because then they'll come in thinking, oh, we know this, we're experts. Yeah, that's really nice. So going on to teaching resources, there's a lot of teaching resources that you can have, like, you know, supporting teaching. You've got visual prompts or, you know, stimulation items. Like, you ever get those like feely bags where you're trying to distract or encourage a child who may have additional learning needs? You might want to say, oh, okay, put your hand in the feely bag. What can you feel? And then they can sort of play around with the squishy ball, or they can tell you what it feels like. If is it furry, is it smooth?
Mm-hmm.
You can have variation and diversification of approaches. So simply this just means you changing the way you approach teaching, you know, depending on what set of learners you've got. So if you've got a class full of EAL children, you're going to change the way you're going to simplify your language. If you've got a class full of younger learners, it's the same thing again. If you've got the same topic you're teaching for year 6, you're going to change it and make it more, you know, a higher range, aren't you? Use more specific and terminology language on that.
Mm-hmm. You're
going to provide opportunities to develop ICT skills. So again, this is like what we did for minimum core when we're, you know, putting in English, maths and ICT into it. So you might even simply just want to say, okay, we're doing patterns in math right now. Come up and see, put a software on, put a game on, and ask them to have match the pattern, and where they can just touch the whiteboard, and that's them using their ICT skills.
Mm-hmm.
When you physically use resources, regardless of what they are, it does make the lesson more memorable. You know, I remember we were talking about lifespan and life cycles. And at that point, I was one of the TAs that were in the class. There were 3 or 4 of us across year 1. And our class teacher we had all our baby photos in, showed the children, they loved it. Then we asked them to bring their own photos in. And then one session, one of the TAs actually had a 8-month-old baby. So she asked if she was comfortable bringing the baby in, and she did. And the children sat around in a big circle. The baby was in his mummy's lap. And he was actually, everyone was like, you know, what does he look like? Can he crawl? They were showing him toys. So at that time, that baby was a resource, as we would say, for use of a better word. But it did make that lesson memorable for them, because for ages they talked about Mrs. Baby and how cute he was and how small he was, the tiny clothes that he was wearing, and so on. So again, it leads into the alternative to real things. So some students might not physically have access to certain resources, so they can actually see and use certain things. And again, it'll help you to actively engage your learners. They'll be interested. They'll be wanting to know, what is this thing that Miss is showing to me? What are we doing right now? Can I get a touch of it? Can I see what it is? You know, so they will be engaged. So almost on to the last point on this is the views of learners. So because we're taking into account the views of our learners as well, ways to get this is just to get feedback from your learners. Ask them what they think. You know, look at how they respond to the learning. So physically keep attention on them. And then again, if you ask them questions, you're able to find out what sort of information they're retaining. So if you remember in Unit 1, I showed you the KWL chart. What do I know? What do I want to know? And what have I learned on it? That's good for the older students to find out, you know, what their feedback is, what their prior knowledge was, and what sort of things that they've actually learned, and if there's any gaps in learning. So there's loads of ways to do it. You can also do the views of others. So others, if I think it was in Unit 1 or Unit 2, we talked about who others are. Others are like your colleagues, your external psychologists or speech therapists, admin staff, TAs, teachers, and so on, anybody that is parents and all that. So we can get feedback and advice from our colleagues. We can get advice on what sort of resources we need to use, what sort of teaching practices we need to use, what adaptations you should make. For young learners, for within primary and high school, you can speak to their parents or guardians and just ask about what their interests are. So if somebody likes Paw Patrol, maybe you'll want to create a handout that has Paw Patrol figures on it and say how many dogs are there, or how many capes are there, and so on. Now, I remember gaining very good advice from one of my colleagues here where I work. It was my first time coming on to from face-to-face to online teaching. And I remember that one of my classes that I teach in healthcare, they weren't very interactive. There was the odd student that would be very verbal, and they'd be really, goading them on to actually ask questions. But when that student wasn't attending sessions or when they'd actually finished, the other students were completely silent. There was no interaction. Every time I asked a question, it was just quiet. So I remember mentioning this to my boss, and he just said to me, don't worry about the physical lesson for the next lesson. All you've got to do is you're going to sit there and you're going to do a question and answer session where you're just going to talk to each other, tell them about yourself, ask them about them, encourage everyone to talk and say, right, this is your 5 minutes, you talk, you tell us. So we just spent an hour chatting to each other, and it was one extra lesson, but it did actually work. Everybody got a little bit more comfortable. It didn't get everyone to open up straight away. Some people were still quiet, but it still gave them the opportunity to not be nervous around each other. So sometimes feedback and advice is fantastic to get. So, are you okay with what we've gone over so far?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, how to answer AC 3.1. So, you're just going to carry out a review. You're going to look at what resources you use. These resources that you're using, are they meeting the needs of your learners? So, think about what type of learners you've got in your class. Do these resources, or think about what type of learners you had in your last year now, because obviously new year, new set of learners, it's going to take a little while to figure out. So how do they meet those needs, and how do they meet those needs? So if you've got a child that is visually impaired, has to wear glasses, what are you physically doing for that child? For a child with EAL, what are you doing? For somebody who might have autism, what are you doing, and so on? Think about, write about, do you gain feedback? And if you do gain feedback, how do you do this? Or if you don't gain feedback, say how you can do this. So, obviously this is feedback from your students, from your from the parents, from the colleagues, and so on. Sometimes even asking a simple question, oh, did you guys like that? Or I think the simplest way that I remember one of my fellow teachers used to do it was, at the end of her comprehension lessons, she would get the students to draw a face. So it would be a smiley face to show that they've understood, a face with a straight line to show that they were okay, or a face with an unhappy smile showing that they didn't understand. And it really helped when we went through the books later on to see how they feel about it. And again, last point in this, do you adapt your sessions and your resources according to the views of learners? So if a learner has told you, or a parent or a colleague or other specialists have said that child A needs this, this and that, and child B needs to sit closer to your whiteboard, and child C needs to not be near these distractions, do you actually adapt it? Do you listen to them? And what do you do to listen to them? Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So go on to 3.2, where it's identify areas for improvement in own use of resources to meet the individual needs of learners. So on here, you're just going to look at, identifying what areas need improvement, what resources can you do. So you're going to think about what areas are you doing well in, and what areas could be improved. So how will you do this, and what is the impact of this improvement? So the most important part is your improvements that you need to focus on. So for example, you could put down your strengths. You could just say that I've got confidence in using a range and variety of resources. I've got the awareness of impact. I know I've got different opportunities for differentiation when I design my resources. My practical skills are good. I can adapt design and resources, and I can address a range of learners' needs and embed ICT at the same time. So you can put down something like that. That's what I'm good in. And then you can put down, I've put down some areas for improvement. So I just really tried thinking of lots of different things. So areas for improvement, you're going to carry out a skills audit for yourself. How good are you with your policies and following the regulations of your school? Are there any areas that you need to actually manage, or would you like to just carry out a skills audit to see where you're up to date on or what things you're not too sure of? Sometimes this is an uphill battle to make sure that you're up to date on your subject knowledge. So does it need updating? Do you need to do more CPD? You know, what sort of areas can you go and improve on? Then you've got alternative approaches. So how can you actually do certain things? Can you use a different style, or do you actually just stick to the same style day in, day out? Now, before I came into teaching, I always thought, okay, I'm going to do this course, what you're doing, and then I'll go on to do my QTLS, which I'll do, and then I'll just go straight into teaching and that'll be done. I won't need to do any more studying. I'll have a nice, simple time. I'll just teach my specialism and I'll be okay. That was a complete and utter nonsense that I was thinking, because to keep up to date, you're constantly doing CPD. The amount of CPD I have done in these past few years, I've never done before. I mean, working as a teaching assistant and then going straight into doing these qualifications, coming into teaching, you think that that's it, you're done, you're okay now. But because you have a different set of responsibilities, you're working in a completely different scale from what I was doing as a teaching assistant, where I went into support and just differentiate certain things and manage a couple of things here and there. From that, coming straight into teaching and looking at what sort of areas I need to focus and improve. So my whole point is you'll do a lot of CPD even when you're finished. Then even things like exploring different technologies, seeing what sort of things can you use, how can the presentations that you make, how can you make them more interesting, how can you make sure that they're not, completely worded or that they're laid out in a particular way. So even that, for me, still is an area for improvement that I could work on. And I think it's one thing that you constantly carry on as well. Areas of improvement could be like developing blended learning. So, if you've got flexible or distance learning, or if you go into another lockdown, what can you do to make sure that your kids, actually your students, your kids still actually want to come in and want to log on when you can't control it? Things like identifying range of specific learning needs. So how to address those, how to address diversity, putting in new approaches, make your lessons interesting, and then, actually using different resources. So rather than just using a handout, so maybe you can do a role play one day. You're doing a maths activity about grouping. So maybe you can get the children up to the front and do groups of twos. Get 4 or 5 children up, have them split up, get another one to come up and say, show me a group of 2, where they can physically move the children around and so on. So are you okay with what we've gone over for 3.2?
Yes.
So to answer this, you just need to identify, basically, like I've already said, is your improvements, what you have in your own use of resources. So this is all about how you use resources. So start off with the strengths that you've got, what you're good at, and then include a detailed paragraph on what areas you can use to improve. So things like using a diverse range of resources, mix it up a little bit, make it more fun and interactive, utilizing staff members, Is there somebody who's good at art? Or is there someone who's really good at doing like dramatical plays or drama teacher that you can come in and use? And then listening and adapting your resources in accordance to what the learners and the staff are telling you as well. So yeah, so that's all it is for 3.2. Let me just turn this recording off.